Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So we're now in week 13th. So as usual, I've tried to upload a file of this class outline, but I failed, or the web page might go wrong. So now I use the email account to save this class outline. Will cure later in this class to help you out through the class dealings. So now we have a class outline. Okay, in this class I plan to discuss two themes. The first one is ambiguities in rulemaking procedure, and the second is about the liability of government. And also you will see some visual aids as usual, 3 pictures, except this from internet sources to facilitate your understanding. Could you see it, kind of my small attempt about what the educational engineering of the construction, kind of way to facilitate your vision and some exposure, easy exposure about the point of focus I intended on. You will also be soon available of the printouts to cover this topic, and it will not be exhaustive as we have experienced, so brief. So I advise to supplement the class discussion with printouts later about the individual study and others. So the concept is perhaps related with the previous point. What the volume of what the agency rules about its implications on the American community, and also the issue entails is significant. The problem of due process about the rulemaking procedure. So EPA and other public agencies would challenge the courtroom about others, and perhaps you also will be introduced between 2 important points in distinction: legislative and adjudicative rulemaking. As you expect, the Goldberg or Matthews doctrine, in high elaboration on the due process concept, is quite pivotal through the controversy or cases in this area. And the concept is the adjudicative rulemaking is fatally irrelevant with the constitutional requirement in a due process of law. So procedural requirement are actually shaped by the core policy need to be penetrated through the adjudicative rulemaking in frame and a system. That is a basic notion we make distinct from a legislative rulemaking. Consider the area of legislative rulemaking. So that is practically required of various reasons. The consistency or legal predictability could be enhanced in that elaboration or any efforts and that make the enforcement of law and public policy in a predictable manner. So we generally see it working and operative to serve the goals of administrative role and responsibility as expected by the Constitution. And that is one important attribute as we learn through this class, latitude and leniency. The executive branches, including President typically, and other public agencies, are actually conferred upon some invaluable area, or what they empowered by Constitution. Their role is quite creative in measures from the delegation of Congress or others, and Constitution and the statute initiated by Congress has been appeared to intact, and also authority and structure was actually provided. But still we have some distinct area inviolable in terms of a constitutional mandate. So the executive branch has preserved, in their own initiative. That necessitates the rest of rulemaking could not be intervened or disrupted by other concerns. The judiciary also is less active and perhaps true in compliance with the constitutional mandate. So that is a matter of separation of power principle. Imagine if the judicial branch may impose some stringent guideline about legislative rulemaking to actually transgress the sure preserve of the executive branch. That actually countermanded the constitutional structure and authority. So legislative rulemaking is legislative rulemaking deserves a fair spectrum of a discretion. That is the matter of a constitutional structure. So the judicial branch also need to take care about that point. Nonetheless, judicative rulemaking need to be made distinct. So the due process concept, actually was enforced in frame and some quite. So you now have some ideas between two concepts, and that has long been persistent in a viewpoint. In many important notions now we intact. So I have illustrated some cases. For example, Natural Resources Defense Council versus Beaumont Yankee Nuclear Power Corporation, decided in 1976. And I have also illustrated one quite insightful article presented by Kristen B. Harrington. So this class was based on the textbook also by that author, and it featured in the journal Law and Policy, published in 1988. And also one important case about this distinction, and Motor Vehicles Manufacturers Association for the State Farm Mutual Automobile Insurance Company. So many others about. And one other notion you now be given about this area of concern is kind of a procedure was set forth by APA and respective state enacted by Congress. And the kind of a basic public policy is very consequential. That is the point to be reminded. Since public policy is actually creative, as you see, with in fine contrast with the rigidity of law and others. It's static nonetheless. For example, you will be exposed to one interesting case about motor vehicle safety. I featured one scene in the visual projection. Some cargoes for the air's purpose sit inside the car. She wears a safety belt to ensure his personal safety about a possible accident. So, a motor vehicle is convenient and one of symbol about capitalist economy. We actually have perhaps a personal affinity seriously about lifetime, so that is attractive product. So we have what we may learn about car. And the Korean public in 1970s and 80s have aspired to have his own car. So quite fascinating. So that is what the benevolence without immaterial aspect we now entertain through the routine days of life. The problem is the safety about its use in the public street. And I have some example in previous class about road safety agency and others. So it is a great public issue, and the industry, one of a stakeholder about this policy area, actually has a serious interest in many public regulations. The public agency, of course, elaborates to ensure the level of public safety, to regulate the industries in due terms and expected of it. Still, lobbying and other factors would intervene to produce the final result in terms of public policy about this matter. In some period of time, we have a rules made by public agency about some mandatory design about the safety belt. So the car must be made not to stop if the driver failed to wear seat belts. So it is one important policy written in the public rule mandated to comply. That is a little antedated form of regulation. Soon after, we have improved nature of rules, which requires to provide a passive restraints. Of course, your expectation will be easy about this cost imposed upon industry to meet the standards delineated by the regulations and others. So passive restraints, often called airbag, has been mandated about manufacturing guidelines, and perhaps a consequential extent of detriment would be imposed on the management of industries. Actually, the voice of stakeholders are quite wider in spectrum. Nonetheless, the voice from the industries and association of businesses quite echoing, unlike the civic activist groups or the voices. The lobbying would be more intense, perhaps, in high chances, and that is perceived in a dual perspective. In one sense, it facilitates the democratic governance. So the industry may inform the bureaus about the civil society. Industry is quite pivotal, production side of stakeholders, and that is what actually a dominant force to engineer the community. And what are others? The consumer side is also quite broad. You consider in scope, less organized to prevent against any social injustice. So the context of interaction is what need to be promoted in one sense, and might go ethically wrong in other aspect. So that subtle contrast in understanding the dynamism in this area need to be considered. The passive restraint, you will see later, has been revamped under the initiative of Reagan administration, and the prior type of rules has been abandoned in that initiative. That, of course, the president is ultimately also about public rulemaking, and also implementation of a democratic will of American citizens. So, nonetheless, that raised actually a concern and suspicion about this value in terms of rules of law ideas. So, how do you see the difference between the revision of a current paradigm and the new initiative to mobilize the interest and concerns in creating a public policy? That should be made a distinct. In the court rulings, you consider, and that is a concept. So the more extent of care and caution need to be upheld through the process in the revision. That would be required, principally because in your expectation, to not to disparage the due expectations from the policy addresses. So that attempt was failed. What I said, the deregulation initiative by the court authority. So we have at that point in more detail. So the public policy is quite esoteric. You consider fundamental in some cases. In that period of time, you'll see a great initiative in consolidation and some what a desired plot about neoliberalization. You need to have some awareness about that. What Margaret Thatcher and Reagan now be considered a prime schema about the new trend to boost national economy, and the kind of concept has been developed into the paradigm of small government. Massive layoffs in the cause of a competitiveness has been undertaken from the beginning of government and public organizations through the private enterprises. And also deregulation is what they deemed most desired value to serve the current capitalist economy, which of course highly corroborative of ease and convenience on behalf of private enterprises. The enterprise often encounter difficulties and cumbersome regulations about carries their business operation orders. So that is one concept. And you also have some idea of trade liberalization in that initiative. So the public policy might concept highly in wider compass. You see, the level of top leaders of nation might pivotally interwoven with the value of public policy and the public goodness. The concept is a central about the routine days of work. It might be upgraded in ultimately, for example, between two paradigms of politics. You consider for. So what is, for example, the Marx-Leninism, as you learn in the comparative legal tradition class. So now, even the constitutional structure often speculated as governing in most liberal jurisdiction may be dispensed away in the fundamental interest of a communist ideology. So you will have, for example, pro-advertising office without any stringent standard of law about evils and others. And what is a princelings in Chinese terms? The top leaders would not be elected. Rather, some small communist elite class would breed. They are core class to what actually dispose the basic goals and agendas of nation. You consider. So the Congress, for example, would be a puppet which is expected to merely endorse the prearranged agendas or issues, bills presented by Communist Party. And the Communist Party also was governed by that small class of allies. So now we see, in public policy terms, some distinct development, as you can see, the East Asian Europe or Russian Federation. We may see a orthodoxy of communist regime from the former Soviet Union. As you learn, it was quite dismantled. So the public policy is evolutionary in nature and attribute. Given two orthodoxies in ideology, we may consider in good contrast between Marxist-Leninism and the liberal constitutionalism in Korea. So in Korea and United States, so constitutionalism has been spawned originally from the United States, and that is two important documents or ideas now, which has prevailed over the last century. The consequence is dubious about the future. As we learn through this class, the United States is being ruled based on that document. The classic document was traced back to 200 years ago. And the former Soviet Union practiced dictatorship based on a Marxist ideology and practically realized in the initiative of Iranian and the Bolshevik Revolution. So the public policy has been taught about participation, information, and science-based decision-making. As you see, for example, participation is one important strength you consider in liberal constitutional state, and the public agency in the area is expected to act on that basis and also on information we have learned. And paradoxically, the Constitution would be relegated as secondary in the communist ideas. Marxism is considered the most epochal product of a social science. And that ideology is the basis to rule the nation. So the public policy, along with this aura and ethos, is quite encompassing, you consider. Even the check would perhaps only be found in the U.S. Constitution, for example. The criminal policy also could differ in paradigm. For example, I have illustrated prosecuting officer, and the judicial branch is expected to be supervised by the organs of democratic representation. Each level has been responsible to supervise the court judgment and the action. People's Congress may be administered in the geographical distribution, and the level would be found. I have conducted an interview about the Seworo incident yesterday. Some interview teams has called early in the morning to arrange time about it. The broadcasting of the media was devoted to air the kind of events or occurrences over a station states, 20 or China, and its coverage was wider of East and restrict to the countries of that region, and now collaborate with SBS. So in that interview, their interest is also on that point about criminal justice system of South Korea. So you know some group of communist nations, what it Laos, Vietnam, and what China is also the same nature country you consider. So the concern is the kind of differences we can identify among the group of nations that cover to air the issues or events. So the socialist status would be prevailing, as you expect, in communist or socialist states, and quite social to pressure for the socialist understanding of criminal justice. That is in comparison, as you expect, with the individualistic base of a criminal law. You consider, for example, the proportionality principle may not be respected in serious terms about the criminal justice system in socialist states. So the public policy is quite what I call it. So I have some interesting opportunity with a Singapore base of a media station, which will be expected to air. And we also have some lesson from Sewol Ho incident. The criminal proceeding will be progressed of months, and we have a three-tier of appeal system, and the criminal law and in juristic terms requires the place of a criminal act is a forced priority in principle about exercise of competent jurisdiction. So Gwangju provincial code would be responsible to deal with the case, and we have a appellate court in this region. Perhaps might be appealed to the Supreme Court. So interesting experiment about a constitutional instruction, and also what some series of criminal law others. So advised to focus your attention of the development of case. So we also need to brief on the second topic, liability. How do you connote the differences between responsibilities and liabilities in law? But actually, we have complete the kind of concept, perhaps most important in this class purpose, government accountability or responsibility of public agency about rule of law ideas. That is one dominant preserve we anticipate from this class. And one other hybrid in concept about the liability of government. So liability is made distinguished. You see, for example, you may imagine when with this term about tort damages, for example, and the damages from the breach of contract. And what you also imagine the kind of a criminal liability for perpetrators, what is. So we often argue about the culpability, criminal culpability on the soldiers in the battlefield. He might possess a legal authority to kill the enemies or other states. And so the kind of a argument would be due to which pertains to this area of concern. So might be. And also we discuss the tort scheme about negligence and the differences between criminal culpability and mental state of criminals, and what is a due care, and regional person standard would be a fundament to get through the tort. And what in some cases we have no for insurance liability scheme about tort and others, and the tort might be scheme to compensate the victims and to deter the recurrence of the tort activities or others. The punitive damages were instituted over tradition and history, and might argue in its constitutional legitimacy, typically around in the context of foreign jurisdictions. So the liability will not go in the same fate in terms of a strict legal viewpoint with responsibility. Those need to be distinguished typically in this class purpose. So we now have some basic a proclamation about this concern. The state can do no wrong. The state is actually ultimate and superior entity. That could not be tarnished or others. So, raison stat, you might have supposed kind of a idealistic scheme from Hegelian or others. So it is unimaginable for the ruled to challenge to recover a specific damages or others. Of course, they could argue in public terms about accountability of government. So consider, for example, what kind of a great monarch in history, Henry VIII, he actually proclaimed the establishment of national church against then a prevailing Catholic. So he is admired as an influential figure in nationalization of Great Britain, and many monarchs in feudal times in European states and also England is considered one super rich in contemporary terms. So now their assets could be unrivaled by contemporary figures. For example, consider a Bill Gates or a Warren Buffett. Their asset seems to be quite smaller than the previous model. So the state can do wrong. The dogma would serve in other aspect. A protection of a assets monarch. How do you suppose is? So I have stated the science or social science and its influence. For example, I have illustrated Marxism. Now we have some other figure named Piketty. So his work would actually bring a controversial consequence about its impact. In my understanding, his theme is quite simple, but with the extended ambit of a empirical evidence. His collection is quite exhaustive through the global jurisdictions. And his point is quite ethical. Now the assets and treasure of a person witnesses quite stark contrast between top a small scale of persons, super rich we often call, and their anomaly through the succession laws or others. So his point might converge to taxation to restore social justice, and that concept was once addressed by other scholar from the United States, Tobin. The concept of Tobin's tax is also come into play. Comes into play, and so actually we also need to see the liability scheme in other. The class purpose must be restored. So perhaps the Gini income disparity, about Gini coefficient, and the social science is not irrelevant, as I have make a point. The APA is now on the three concepts I've illustrated, and you might undertake a research master class if you are a graduate student, a quantitative reasoning and qualitative reasoning. In terms of quantitative reasoning, you will experience kind of a experimental design about, for example, the control group or a experimental group, and kind of a variables, and so what is internal validity or external validity. Piketty have illustrated to expose a scope of statistics compiled and gathered from the history and also diverse is to facilitate its persuasion. And the research outcome has been contended in terms of its empirical statistical accuracy might be disputed. In any case, now the public policy has to be administered based on science, and in that course of development, the research methods might be one concern raised in the due context. What the research method has originally been employed in service about the natural science, for example, and psychology, other human and field of a social science, a natural science, and nonetheless, the structure and attribute has well been imported in some area of a public policy. Consider, for example, one recent work about the non-profit organizations and a civic engagement actually disposed the most important theme of a public policy in a very statistical way and quite a fine design of a research. For example, in his theme of that author, the nonprofit is one important stakeholders in product produce one important scope of stakeholders, which might be weaker from the industrial areas, but consider their influence in the society and in terms of a democratic governance. So civic engagement need to be facilitated for every reason. If you are a bit a public policy student, you know so his point of consideration is quite interesting. You consider he raised a variable about the specific statute in tax exemption. Internal Revenue Service has instituted a tax exemption status in their rules. They create rules to find the status. And the non-profits who most of enthusiastic to benefit from their status. So the course of conduct and action will be decided in expectations about that terms. And so he conducted empirical studies to prove his hypothesis. And null hypothesis, for example, alternative hypothesis you consider through the research method class. So now the state can do no wrong. I have intended to bring your attention about the same. So that is a statistical matter, empirical study, the authenticity and truthfulness of a research in one aspect, and also consider its implications. So the king can do no wrong might be seen in that theme. Then do you consider they are eligible to entertain an absolute state immunity? You traditionally know the two principles surrounding the state immunity: absolute immunity, restrictive immunity. What is a commercial activity? And what is the intrinsic sphere of a state function to immunize the state liability, for example? The king can do no wrong. The assets of monarch could not be deplete. It's okay. Should be protected. How do you consider? And actually, the ideas of, for example, is sanctity is also one factor we may derive from the concern. So quite hard to understand its origin. The state can do no wrong. The area has long been treated in piecemeal. For example, what is the Federal Tort Claims Act, and also we will have some important statute produced in the middle of a 19th century. What is the concept under the color of government? The public officers may be responsible. Sorry, I have to use the most strict word. Liable when the damage has been the thorax occurred in the course of performing the official capacity or responsibility. How do you assess the implications of apparency? We may apply to find the rules two ways, a method, objective standard to identify the cause of official conduct or capacity. In appearance, the act or conduct may be considered to fall within the official preserve. Consider, for example, the public officers may drive to report to the workplace. He regularly commutes in 9 o'clock to get onto the public road to drive and others, and may incur a traffic accident to damage a person physically or then is the government liable to the victims in terms of tort damages. So probably the generous standard of rule would provoke explosion of a tort suit against federal government. The federal government or state government often is actually correct to have only assessed to suffice the tort damages. The individual public officer would not be rich enough to explain for the court amount about the sum of damages. So often tort victims would like to capture the government in responsibility about the damages. So the point also may be pushing the kind of a cost and benefit analysis, and the frame need to be practical and what actually enforceable. So the division about the damages, liabilities between the governmental entity and individual public officer need to be made sure to serve that difficulty in one aspect. And consider also the rule of discretion long prevailed over the logic and metaphor of the U.S. court. The discretion, as you expect, is the concept, the central in this class subject. The public agency is ruling bureaucracy. They must be arrogant and unattackable from the rule, industry or consumers and other stakeholders. And I have previously mentioned that is the structure the constitutional drafters envisaged, as you see. So that is attribute we now see. So the discretion would immunize the state agencies from total liabilities. They could act in their own deliberation and moral conviction about the issue or others, and also practical values that the public policymakers may pursue. So the court, on the basis of a discretion, a rule of discretion, often do not grant a tort damages against the federal government. We consider the concept later in this class, and some interesting cases have been I have made it available for your pleasure. A child, how do you see the role and responsibility of public agency? You know the Department of Social Service and their role to ensure against the child abuse, domestic violence, and one acute child in need for the grand public. Okay, so my aid arrived. So that is the first class of this session. And I'll come back soon to respond to the second session briefly. Thank you for your attention. See you in the second class.